Admiral Hansol Kim stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable and looked at the stars through the large viewing window. The ship was massive, stretching over 2 kilometers from front to back, and it was the pride of the Terran Defense Fleet. Around him, officers worked at their stations, checking systems and monitoring space for any signs of trouble. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as the crew went about their daily tasks. Hansol had been in command of the 7th Battle Group for 3 years now. His fleet consisted of 12 battleships, 36 cruisers, and dozens of smaller support ships. They patrolled the outer edges of human space, keeping watch for pirates, rebels, or any other threats that might harm the colonies. It was mostly routine work, but Hansol knew that could change at any moment. Lieutenant Jimin Park sat at the communications station, wearing her headset and monitoring the various radio frequencies that ships used to talk to each other. She was young, maybe 25 years old, with short black hair and bright eyes that missed nothing. Jimin had joined the fleet 2 years ago and quickly proved herself to be one of the best communications officers in the entire Navy. The bridge was quiet except for the soft beeping of computers and the occasional report from an officer. Captain Do-Hyun Lee stood near the tactical display, studying the positions of all the ships in the fleet. He was Hansol's second in command, a careful man who always thought things through before acting. Do-Hyun had served in the fleet for 15 years and had seen his share of battles. Commander Sora Choi worked at the science station, analyzing data from the long-range sensors. She was the fleet's expert on alien life and technology, though humans had not yet met any other intelligent species. Sora spent most of her time studying strange signals from deep space and trying to understand what they might mean. She was brilliant with degrees in biology, physics, and linguistics. The routine of the patrol was broken when Jimin suddenly sat up straight in her chair. She pressed her hand to her headset and frowned, listening carefully to something that the others could not hear. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls, adjusting frequencies and boosting the signal strength. "Admiral," Jimin called out, her voice tense with excitement. "I'm picking up something unusual. It's very faint, but it doesn't match any known human transmission patterns." Hansol turned from the window and walked over to Jimin's station. The other officers also stopped their work and looked toward the communications console. Do-Hyun moved closer, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm, even though there was no immediate danger. "Can you clean it up?" Hansol asked, leaning over Jimin's shoulder to look at the display. The screen showed waves of static with occasional spikes that might have been actual signals. Jimin's fingers danced over her controls, running the signal through various filters and enhancement programs. Slowly, the static began to clear, and something that sounded almost like speech emerged from the speakers. It was not human speech, though. The sounds were strange, almost musical, with tones that rose and fell in patterns that no human language used. "It's definitely artificial," Sora said, moving away from her science station to join them. "This isn't natural radio noise from a star or planet. Someone or something is deliberately transmitting this signal." The bridge fell silent as everyone listened to the strange sounds coming from the speakers. The signal was weak and kept fading in and out, but there was definitely a pattern to it. It repeated every few minutes as if whoever was sending it wanted to make sure it would be heard. "Where is it coming from?" Hansol asked. Jimin checked her instruments and pointed to a section of the star map that appeared on the main screen. "The Cathera system, about 40 light-years from here. It's outside our normal patrol area in unexplored space." Do-Hyun crossed his arms and looked skeptical. "Could be a trap. Pirates sometimes use fake distress signals to lure ships into ambush." "No," Sora said, shaking her head. "The mathematical structure of this signal is too complex for humans to fake. And listen to those harmonic patterns. This is definitely from a non-human source." Hansol felt his heart begin to beat faster. First contact with an alien species was something that every officer in the fleet had trained for, but none of them had ever expected it to actually happen. Humanity had been exploring space for over a century and had never found any signs of intelligent life. "Can you translate it?" Hansol asked Sora. Sora was already connecting her portable computer to the communication system. The Universal Translation Protocol should be able to work on it, given enough time. The computer needs to analyze the patterns and try to match them with known linguistic structures. For the next hour, the bridge crew worked to decode the mysterious signal. Jimin boosted the reception strength and recorded everything. Sora ran the sounds through every translation program in the ship's computer. Do-hyun coordinated with the other ships in the fleet, having them also listen for the signal and add their data to the analysis. Finally, the computer chimed with success. Words began to appear on Sora's screen, and a mechanical voice started, speaking through the bridge speakers. The translation was rough and full of gaps, but the meaning was clear enough to make everyone freeze. Emergency. Help needed. Worlds dying. Harvesters consuming all. Population trapped. Defenses failing. Any who hear this, please respond. Villani people. Cathara system. 3 worlds already lost. The message repeated, and, with each repetition, the computer's translation became clearer. The aliens calling themselves Villani were under attack by something called harvesters. Their worlds were being destroyed, their people killed or captured, and they were asking anyone who might hear their signal for help. Hansol looked around the bridge at his officers. They all stared back at him, waiting for his decision. This was the moment that would define not just their careers, but possibly the future of humanity itself. First contact with aliens was one thing, but diving into an alien war was something entirely different. How long has this signal been transmitting? Hansol asked. Jimin checked her readings. Based on the signal degradation and the patterns, I estimate at least 3 months, maybe longer. 3 months, Do-hyun said grimly. If they were asking for help 3 months ago, they might already be dead. Sora shook her head. The signal is still active, which means someone is still alive, to maintain the transmitter. But if they've been under attack for 3 months? She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The situation was desperate. Hansol walked to the center of the bridge and looked up at the main screen, which now showed the location of the Cathara system. 40 light-years was a long way, but not impossible for the fleet to travel. The question was whether they should get involved in what sounded like a war between alien species they knew nothing about. Young Ensign Min Ho-yoon, who had been quietly monitoring the engine status, spoke up from his station. Admiral, with respect, shouldn't we at least investigate? Even if we can't help, we should try to learn what's happening out there. Hansol nodded slowly. Min-ho was right. Humanity couldn't ignore this. Whether they helped or not, they needed to know what was happening in their galactic neighborhood. If these harvesters were as dangerous as the signal suggested, they might eventually threaten human space as well. Do-hyun, what's our combat readiness? Hansol asked. All ships are at normal operational status. We have full ammunition loads, and all systems are functioning properly. The fleet can be ready for combat operations within 6 hours. Hansol made his decision. Signal all ships in the battle group. We're changing course for the Cathara system. Maximum speed. The bridge erupted into activity as officers began carrying out his orders. Jimin contacted the other ships and relayed the new course. Sora began preparing detailed analysis of everything they knew about the signal. Do-hyun started planning combat formations and weapon loadouts. As the great ships of the 7th Battle Group changed course and accelerated toward the unknown, Hansol wondered what they would find when they arrived. Would they discover a thriving alien civilization grateful for human help? Or would they find only empty worlds and the remains of a species that had died while waiting for rescue that came too late? Min Ho-yoon quietly recorded a message to his family back on Earth, knowing that he might not return from humanity's first venture into interstellar conflict. Whatever awaited them in the Cathara system, the 7th Battle Group was about to make history. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Cathara system and immediately knew they were too late to prevent a disaster. Admiral Hansol Kim stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and stared at the horror displayed on the main screen. What should have been a vibrant star system with multiple inhabited worlds was now a graveyard floating in space. 2 of the 4 planets that the long-range sensors had detected were completely dark. No lights on their night sides, no heat signatures, no radio emissions. They were dead worlds, stripped of everything that had once made them alive. The 3rd planet showed massive damage across its surface, with huge craters and burn marks visible, even from this distance. Only the fourth planet still showed signs of life, though even it was clearly under attack. Commander Hyejin Wu worked frantically at her tactical station, analyzing the debris that floated throughout the system. Domi. Pieces of ships drifted everywhere, some of them clearly artificial but designed in ways that human engineers had never seen. The metal was strange, with curves and patterns that seemed almost organic rather than manufactured. "My God," whispered Captain Do-hyun Lee as he studied the tactical display. What could do this to an entire star system? Lieutenant Jimin Park was busy scanning all radio frequencies, trying to pick up any signals from survivors. Her equipment detected faint transmissions from the fourth planet, but they were weak and intermittent. Whatever was left of the Villani civilization was barely hanging on. Commander Sora Choi examined the wreckage through the ship's powerful telescopes, trying to understand what had happened here. The destroyed ships didn't look like anything in human databases. They were sleek and elegant, built with technology that seemed more advanced than anything humans had developed. Yet they had been torn apart like paper toys. "Admiral," Jimin called out, her voice tight with concentration. "I'm receiving a direct transmission from the third planet. It's using the same harmonic patterns as the distress signal, but much clearer." "Put it on screen," Han Sol ordered. The main display flickered and then showed the interior of what looked like a command center. Standing in front of the camera was a being unlike anything any human had ever imagined. It was tall and thin, maybe 7 feet in height, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. Light seemed to move through its translucent body in patterns that shifted and changed as it moved. Its face was angular and alien, but there was something in its large, multifaceted eyes that was universally recognizable. Desperate hope. The teen creature began to speak, its voice creating complex harmonic sounds that the ship's computer quickly translated into English. When it spoke, the crystal-like structures on its body glowed and pulsed in rhythm with its words. "I am Morthak of the Villani Council," the translation program announced. "You are the ones who responded to our distress call. We did not expect anyone to come. We thought we would die alone." Admiral Kim stepped forward so that the alien could see him on its own screen. "This is Admiral Hansol Kim of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your signal and came as quickly as we could. What happened here?" Morthak's crystalline body seemed to dim slightly, as if the memory was painful. "The harvesters came 6 months ago. They arrived without warning, without any attempt at communication. We tried to contact them, to understand what they wanted, but they simply began their work." "What work?" Sora asked, moving into view of the camera. Instead of answering directly, Morthak manipulated controls that the humans could not see. The display split, showing both the alien and a recording of what had happened to the Cathara system. Humans watched in growing horror as massive biomechanical ships descended on the first planet, like a swarm of metallic locusts. The harvester ships were grotesque combinations of living tissue and advanced machinery. They moved like living creatures but were built like warships, with weapons that seemed to grow from their hulls like tumors. As they approached the planet, they began releasing smaller creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine. "They don't want territory or resources like normal conquerors," Morthak explained, as the recording showed the harvester creatures spreading across the planet's surface. "They consume all biological matter to fuel their reproduction. Plants, animals, people. Everything living becomes food for creating more harvesters." Lieutenant Colonel Taeyang Shin had joined the group on the bridge, and his face was grim as he watched the recording. As the commanding officer of the fleet's Marines, he had seen combat before, but nothing like this. The harvester creatures were systematically devouring everything alive on the planet, leaving behind only lifeless rock and metal. But the worst part came when the recording showed what happened to the Villani people who were captured. Instead of simply killing them, the harvesters absorbed their biological matter while somehow keeping their consciousness intact. The resulting creatures were horrifying hybrids, part Villani, part machine, still aware but no longer in control of their own actions. "Dear God," Do-hyun breathed. "They're still alive in there." Morthak nodded sadly. The harvesters don't just consume life. They preserve the minds of their victims and use their knowledge to become more effective hunters. Every person they capture makes them smarter and more dangerous. The recording continued, showing how the Villani military had tried to fight back. Their ships were beautiful, with elegant curves and energy weapons that fired beams of pure light. Their defensive shields could deflect most forms of attack, and their technology was clearly more advanced than humanity's in many ways. But none of it mattered. The harvesters adapted to every weapon the Villani used. Their bioarmor evolved to resist energy weapons. Their ships learned to mimic Villani technology and turn it against them. Within weeks, the First World was completely stripped of life. We evacuated as many people as we could to the other worlds, Morthak continued. But the harvesters followed us. They consumed the second world, then the third. Now only my world remains, and our defenses are failing. Admiral Kim watched as the recording showed the current state of Morthak's planet. Massive harvester bioships orbited the world, occasionally sending down groups of the hybrid creatures to attack the remaining Villani settlements. The planet's surface was scarred with battle damage, and many of its cities were already dark and empty. How many of your people are left? Sora asked gently. Perhaps 2 million scattered across hidden shelters on this world. We were once a civilization of 12 billion across 4 planets. The bridge fell silent as the humans absorbed this information. An entire advanced civilization had been reduced to 2 million refugees hiding in underground bunkers, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Your ships, Commander Wu said, studying the tactical data. They're more advanced than ours. If you couldn't stop these harvesters, what makes you think we can help? Morthak's crystalline features shifted in what might have been the alien equivalent of a smile. Because you came. In all our databases, in all our knowledge of the galaxy, we have never encountered a species that would travel 40 light years to help complete strangers. Most civilized species would have ignored our signal or sent a probe to observe from a safe distance. Most civilized species? Lieutenant Colonel Shin asked. Are you saying there are others? Oh yes, Morthak replied. The galaxy is full of intelligent life. But most species are practical. They avoid unnecessary risks. They don't intervene in conflicts that don't directly affect them. When we sent our distress signal, we hoped that someone might at least record our final message for history. Admiral Kim felt a strange mixture of pride and concern. It seemed that humanity's willingness to help others was unusual among galactic civilizations. That could be either a great strength or a terrible weakness. Tell us about these harvesters, Kim said. How do they fight? What are their weaknesses? Morthak shared everything the Villani had learned about their enemies. Harvesters were not a natural species, but rather a collective organism that had been consuming civilizations for thousands of years. They were incredibly adaptive, able to modify their biomechanical bodies to counter any threat they encountered. Their ships were grown rather than built, using the biological matter of conquered worlds as raw material. Each ship was essentially a living creature that could heal damage, adapt to new situations, and reproduce when it had consumed enough biomass. They learn from every battle, Morthak warned. Every tactic you use against them, they will adapt to and counter. Our energy weapons became useless after the first few encounters. Our defensive strategies were turned against us. As the human officers listened to this briefing, they began to understand just how dangerous their situation was. They had come here expecting to help an alien species fight off some kind of conventional enemy. Instead, they were facing something that had already proven it could defeat technology more advanced than their own. But Admiral Kim also began to realize something else. The harvesters had spent months fighting the Villani and learning to counter their advanced energy weapons and sophisticated tactics. They had never encountered anything like human military doctrine. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. The combined human-Villani fleet moved toward the 4th planet where the largest concentration of harvester forces waited. Admiral Hansol Kim stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as his tactical officers prepared for a battle unlike anything humanity had ever fought before. The enemy they faced had already proven it could defeat technology more advanced than their own. Captain Yunji Kang commanded the battleship Daegu Hammer, one of the most powerful vessels in the human fleet. She had been studying the Harvester tactics with her tactical team and had come to a disturbing conclusion. The enemy's biomechanical ships could adapt to energy weapons and sophisticated defensive systems, but they had never encountered anything like human military doctrine. "Admiral," Yunji said over the communication channel, "I've been analyzing the Villani battle records. Their entire military philosophy is based on precision strikes and defensive positioning. They fight like engineers solving a problem. And that's bad because?" Commander Do-hyun Lee asked from his position at the tactical station. "Because humans don't fight like engineers," Lieutenant Jae-wook Choi answered from the weapons station. The young officer had been assigned to analyze human weapon systems and compare them to what the Villani had used against the Harvesters. "We fight like predators." The difference became clear as the human fleet approached the Harvester nest on the fourth planet's moon. While the Villani had used elegant energy weapons that fired precise beams of plasma, human ships carried massive railguns that fired solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds. Where Villani ships relied on energy shields and evasive maneuvers, human battleships were armored with layers of steel and ceramic that could absorb tremendous punishment. Commander Sora Choi had been working with Morthak to understand exactly what they were facing. The Harvester bioships were incredibly sophisticated, able to regenerate damage and adapt their defenses based on whatever weapons were used against them. They had evolved specifically to counter the high-technology approach that most advanced civilizations used in warfare. "They're like antibodies in a biological system," Sora explained to the assembled officers. "They identify threats and develop immunity to them. But they've only encountered energy-based attacks and high-tech defensive systems." Lieutenant Colonel Tae Yang Shin leaned forward at the conference table. As the commander of the fleet's marine forces, he understood warfare from a different perspective than the ship officers. "You're saying they've never fought anyone who uses kinetic weapons and explosive ordnance?" "Exactly," Sora replied. "Most advanced civilizations consider projectile weapons primitive. They prefer clean, efficient energy weapons. But primitive doesn't mean ineffective." The truth of this became apparent when the first Harvester bioships moved to intercept the human fleet. The alien vessels were grotesque but undeniably impressive, their living hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns as they approached. They had adapted to fight Villani energy weapons by developing bioarmor that could disperse and absorb plasma beams. Lieutenant Jae-wook Choi fired the first shot, a railgun round from the Indomitable's main battery. The tungsten projectile, accelerated to nearly 1/10 the speed of light, punched through the Harvester bioarmor like it was paper. The enemy ship's adaptive defenses, designed to counter energy weapons, were completely useless against a simple lump of metal moving at relativistic speeds. The Harvester ship tried to regenerate the damage, its living tissue flowing to seal the breach in its hull. But Jae-wook followed up with high-explosive shells that detonated inside the wound before it could heal. The internal explosions tore the bioship apart from within, something its regenerative systems could not counter. Fast enough. Captain Yunji Kang watched from the Daegu Hammer as more Harvester ships approached her battleship. She had loaded her weapons with a mixture of armor-piercing rounds and nuclear warheads, weapons that the Villani would have considered barbarically crude. But crude or not, they were devastatingly effective against enemies that had never encountered them before. "Fire all batteries," Yunji ordered, and her ship unleashed a barrage of projectile weapons that had been perfected in humanity's long history of warfare. Railgun rounds punched through bioarmor, followed by nuclear warheads that detonated inside the enemy vessels with the force of small suns. Commander Yoo-jin Nam led a squadron of human fighter craft in a coordinated attack on the Harvester formation. The enemy bioships had learned to counter Villani fighter tactics, which relied on precise formation flying and coordinated energy weapon attacks. But human pilots had learned to fight in the chaotic skies above Earth, where survival depended on unpredictability and aggressive maneuvering. Yoo-jin's fighters scattered in all directions, each pilot using random attack patterns that no logical military computer would have programmed. The harvesters, with their collective hive mind intelligence, tried to predict and counter the human tactics but found themselves constantly surprised by maneuvers that seemed to make no tactical sense. The fighters carried weapons that were simple, but effective. Guided missiles with high explosive warheads, chain guns that fired depleted uranium rounds, and in some cases, suicide drones packed with conventional explosives. Nothing sophisticated, but the harvesters had never developed defenses against such primitive weapons. But the real shock came when the first harvester bioship was disabled rather than destroyed. Lieutenant Colonel Shin had been preparing for this moment, knowing that boarding actions would be necessary to fully understand the enemy. As the wounded bioship tried to retreat, human assault shuttles launched from the fleet's battlecruisers. The Marines who emerged from those shuttles were equipped with mechanical exoskeletons, chemical explosive charges, and weapons that fired metal bullets instead of energy beams. They represented humanity's approach to close combat, developed over millions of years of evolution on a world where everything was trying to kill them. The harvester defenders inside the bioship were adapted for fighting Volani soldiers, who preferred to engage at long range with precise energy weapons. They were not prepared for humans who charged directly into close combat, using shotguns, grenades, and mechanical tools to carve through biomechanical corridors. Sergeant Hyunwoo Jang led the first boarding party deeper into the harvester vessel. The interior was a nightmare of living tissue and mechanical components fused together in ways that defied normal engineering. Walls pulsed like arteries, floors felt spongy underfoot, and the air was filled with strange smells and sounds. But Yang and his Marines had trained for urban combat in the worst slums of Earth's megacities. They were used to fighting in cramped, hostile environments where enemies could appear from any direction. The biological maze of the harvester ship was just another battlefield to them. The harvester defenders were creatures that had once been Volani, but were now fused with mechanical components and controlled by the collective intelligence. They were powerful and intelligent, but they fought with the tactical doctrines of the civilization they had consumed. When they tried to engage the humans at long range with bioenergy weapons, the Marines simply charged through the fire, their mechanical exoskeletons absorbing damage that would have killed unarmored soldiers. When the creatures tried to use their superior mobility to outflank the Marines, they discovered that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history hunting and fighting in three-dimensional environments. Private Min Seo Kwok found herself face to face with a creature that had once been a Volani scientist. The biomechanical hybrid was nearly twice her size and armed with weapons that could cut through most forms of armor, but it had never fought an enemy that would deliberately get close enough to plant explosive charges directly on its body. The charges detonated and the creature fell. As it died, something strange happened. For just a moment, the Volani consciousness trapped inside the biomechanical shell broke free, and Min Seo heard a voice whisper, "Thank you." The boarding action continued for 3 hours as the Marines fought their way through the entire bioship. They planted demolition charges throughout the vessel's critical systems, but more importantly, they gathered intelligence about how the harvesters operated. The enemy's collective intelligence was powerful, but it was also inflexible. It could adapt to new weapons and tactics, but only if those tactics followed logical patterns. Human warfare, developed on a death world where survival often depended on doing the unexpected thing, was inherently illogical from the perspective of a collective intelligence that operated like a biological computer. The harvesters could process thousands of variables and develop optimal counters to any rational strategy, but they struggled to predict enemies who sometimes acted on instinct rather than logic. As the Marines extracted from the doomed bioship, Sergeant Jang transmitted his report to Admiral Kim. "The enemy is adaptable but predictable. They fight like a computer program, not like living beings. They can counter anything logical, but they can't handle chaos." Admiral Kim received this information as his fleet continued to destroy harvester bioships throughout the system. The battle was far from over, but it was clear that humanity had achieved something the Volani had not. They were winning. The human fleet approached the fourth planet's moon and discovered that the harvester stronghold was far worse than anyone had imagined. What had once been a natural satellite was now a grotesque fusion of living tissue and mechanical structures that stretched across its entire surface. Biomechanical spires reached up from the moon like infected fingers, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Hansel Kim studied the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The moon itself had been converted into a single massive organism, a world ship the size of a small planet. Thousands of smaller bioships orbited around it like antibodies protecting a vital organ. This was not just a military base. It was the collective consciousness of the entire harvester species. Chief Engineer Seok-jin Kim worked frantically at his station, analyzing the energy readings from the converted moon. The numbers were staggering. The biomechanical world ship was generating more power than a dozen human colonies combined, and all of that energy was being used to process the biological matter from the consumed worlds. Admiral, Seok-jin reported, his voice tense with disbelief. The energy signatures suggest they're not just processing biomass for reproduction. They're maintaining something much more complex. I think they're preserving the consciousness of every being they've ever consumed. Commander Sora Choi felt sick as she understood the implications. It's a living database. They're keeping the minds of entire civilizations alive inside that thing. The revelation changed everything. This was not just a war against an invading species. It was a rescue mission on a galactic scale. Somewhere inside that biomechanical horror were the trapped consciousnesses of billions of beings from dozens of different species, all kept alive in eternal suffering to serve the Harvester Collective. Captain Mi-young-han commanded the battleship, Gwangju's Vengeance, one of the older ships in the fleet but still a formidable weapons platform. She had been listening to the tactical discussions and came to a grim conclusion about their situation. Conventional weapons won't work against something that size, Mi-young said over the communication channel. We could fire every nuclear warhead in the fleet at it and barely scratch the surface. That thing is the size of a moon, and it's been growing for thousands of years. Lieutenant Colonel Tae-yang Shin was coordinating with his Marine commanders, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging boarding action in military history. If we can't destroy it from the outside, we'll have to go inside and take out its critical systems. Admiral Kim knew that Shin was right, but the scale of the operation was almost beyond comprehension. They would need to penetrate the world ship's biomechanical defenses, fight their way through kilometers of hostile territory, and somehow locate and destroy the central consciousness that controlled the entire Harvester Collective. Chief Engineer Seok-jin Kim studied the structural analysis of the world ship and suddenly had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Admiral, what if we don't try to destroy the whole thing? What if we create a breach large enough for a boarding party to enter, then detonate nuclear charges inside the consciousness matrix? Captain Do-hyun Lee looked skeptical. How do we create a breach in something that size? Our weapons are powerful, but that thing has bioarmor several kilometers thick. Seok-jin's answer made everyone on the bridge fall silent. Ramming speed. The plan was desperate and would almost certainly be suicide for whoever attempted it. But it was the only option that had any chance of success. One of the human battleships would accelerate to maximum velocity and ram directly into the world ship's surface, creating a breach that the other ships could exploit. Captain Mi-young-han volunteered immediately. Her ship, the Gwangju's Vengeance, had already taken significant damage in the earlier battles and was operating at reduced efficiency. More importantly, her crew of 3,000 had all volunteered for the mission when they understood what was at stake. We'll overload our fusion reactors during the approach, Mi-young explained to Admiral Kim. The explosion should create a breach several kilometers wide. That should be enough for your boarding parties to enter. Lieutenant Min Ho-yoon, now promoted to lieutenant after his actions in the previous battles, was assigned to lead one of the boarding parties. He had proven himself to be adaptable under pressure and had developed an instinctive understanding of how to fight the harvesters effectively. As the Gwangju's Vengeance began its final approach toward the world ship, the rest of the human fleet engaged the thousands of bioships that rose to defend it. The battle was unlike anything in recorded military history. With human projectile weapons and nuclear warheads, clashing against biomechanical creatures that had evolved specifically for interstellar warfare. Commander Yu-Jin Nam led her fighter squadrons in coordinated attacks on the smaller bioships, using the chaotic tactics that had proven so effective against the Harvester hive mind. Her pilots scattered in all directions, striking at targets of opportunity and withdrawing before the enemy could coordinate an effective response. But the real focus was on Captain Mi-young Han and her crew as they accelerated their battleship toward the world ship's surface. The biomechanical defenses recognized the threat and concentrated their fire on the approaching vessel, but Mi-young had expected this. "All power to forward shields," she ordered, as energy beams and bioprojectiles hammered her ship's defenses. "Maintain course and speed." The Guangzhou's vengeance shuddered under the intense fire but continued its approach. Mi-young's crew worked frantically to keep the ship operational long enough to complete their mission. Chief Engineer Park Dong-ho overloaded the fusion reactors beyond all safety limits, preparing for the massive explosion that would occur when they impacted the world ship. At the last moment, as her ship struck the biomechanical surface of the converted moon, Mi-young transmitted a final message to the fleet. For humanity, and for all the trapped souls we're about to free. The explosion was visible from orbit. The overloaded fusion reactors detonated with the force of several nuclear weapons, tearing a massive wound in the world ship's bioarmor. Biomechanical tissue and strange fluids poured from the breach like blood from a mortal wound. But the world ship began to heal itself almost immediately, its bioarmor flowing back together to seal the breach. Admiral Kim had anticipated this and was ready with the next phase of the plan. "Launch all assault shuttles," he ordered. "Get those boarding parties inside before the wound closes." Lieutenant Min Ho-yoon led 200 Marines through the breach, in small, fast shuttles that could penetrate deep into the world ship's interior before the bioarmor sealed behind them. It was a one-way mission. They would have to fight their way out or die trying. The interior of the world ship was a nightmare beyond human imagination. Corridors stretched for kilometers, lined with biomechanical structures that pulsed with alien life. The air was thick with strange chemicals that would have been toxic to most species, but human respiratory systems, evolved on a world with a constantly changing atmosphere, were able to adapt. Lieutenant Dong-woo Park, a combat medic, who had been cross-trained in demolitions, carried the nuclear charges that would be used to destroy the consciousness matrix. The bombs were specially designed to create maximum disruption to the biomechanical systems that maintained the trapped minds. The Marines fought their way deeper into the world ship, following biomechanical corridors that led toward the central consciousness. The Harvester defenders they encountered were unlike anything they had faced before. These were not converted Villani or other alien species. They were pure Harvester constructs, biomechanical warriors designed specifically for combat. But even these perfect killing machines had weaknesses that human fighters could exploit. Their tactics were based on logical analysis and optimal response patterns, while the Marines used instinct, teamwork, and willingness to take risks that no rational computer would calculate. Sergeant Hyun-woo Jang used shaped charges to blast through biomechanical barriers that would have taken conventional weapons hours to penetrate. Private Min Seo Kwok discovered that the biomechanical floors could be short-circuited with high-voltage electrical weapons, causing entire sections to convulse and become impassable to Harvester defenders. As they approached the central consciousness matrix, the Marines began to hear something that none of them had expected. Voices, billions of voices crying out in languages they could not understand, all pleading for release from their eternal imprisonment. The consciousness matrix itself was a vast chamber filled with biomechanical structures that looked like a fusion of brain tissue and computer circuitry. Floating in biochemical suspension tanks were the preserved remains of countless alien beings, their minds somehow kept active and connected to the collective consciousness. Lieutenant Dong-woo Park stared at the horrific sight and understood that this was not just a weapon or a tool. It was a library of suffering that contained the knowledge and memories of entire civilizations. Every being the Harvesters had ever consumed was here, aware and in agony, forced to serve the collective that had destroyed their worlds. "Set the charges," Lieutenant Yoon ordered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the screaming minds. The aftermath of the battle left the Cathara system eerily quiet. Where once the biomechanical world ship had pulsed with alien life, now only debris drifted in space around the fourth planet's moon. Admiral Han Sol Kim stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched as his ships conducted search and rescue operations among the wreckage. The remaining Harvester bioships had indeed reverted to mindless creatures after the destruction of their central consciousness. Without the collective intelligence to guide them, they became little more than dangerous animals, still capable of violence, but no longer coordinated enough to pose a serious threat to organized military forces. Commander Hyejin Wu coordinated the cleanup operations from her tactical station, directing human ships to destroy the mindless bioships that still posed a danger to civilian populations. It was grim work, but necessary to ensure that no trace of the Harvester threat remained in the system. Lieutenant Min Ho Yoon, now promoted to captain after his heroic actions in the Consciousness Matrix, led recovery teams through the wreckage of the world ship. They were searching for any technology or information that might help humanity understand the full scope of what they had faced. What they found was both horrifying and enlightening. The biomechanical structures contained databanks with records of 17 different spacefaring civilizations that the Harvesters had consumed over the past 1,000 years. Some of the species' names were familiar from ancient galactic databases. Others were completely unknown to both human and Villani science. Commander, Sorsha Choi analyzed the recovered data with growing amazement and horror. The Harvesters weren't just consuming individual worlds, she reported to Admiral Kim. They were systematically eliminating entire civilizations across multiple star systems. If we hadn't stopped them here, they would have continued until they had consumed every intelligent species in the galaxy. The scope of the catastrophe they had prevented was staggering. The Harvesters had been following a pattern of expansion that would have eventually brought them into contact with every inhabited world within 100 light-years of their starting point. Earth itself would have been targeted within the next century. Morthak and the surviving Villani worked closely with the human recovery teams, sharing their knowledge of galactic civilization and helping to decode the Harvester databanks. The crystalline being had become something of an informal ambassador between his species and humanity, and his respect for the humans had grown with each passing day. "Your species confuses us," Morthak admitted during one of his conversations with Admiral Kim. "Most civilized races develop beyond the need for violence as they advance technologically. They solve problems through negotiation, trade, and scientific advancement." Admiral Kim nodded thoughtfully. "And that's exactly why the Harvesters were so effective against them. They adapted to counter civilized warfare but never encountered anyone who still remembered how to be predators." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Captain Do Hyun Lee, who was commanding a survey mission to one of the consumed worlds. His discovery would change everything humanity thought they knew about galactic civilization. "Admiral," Do Hyun reported, his voice tight with amazement, "you need to see what we found on the second planet. The Harvesters didn't completely strip it of technology. There are intact structures here, and they contain something incredible." The structures turned out to be automated message beacons, similar to the distress signal that had brought humanity to the Cathara system in the first place. But these beacons contained messages from civilizations across the galaxy, all reporting encounters with the Harvesters or similar threats. Lieutenant Jimin Park worked with Villani technicians to decode the messages, and what they found painted a disturbing picture of galactic civilization. Species after species had encountered existential threats that their advanced but peaceful societies could not handle. Most had simply accepted extinction rather than fighting back with the kind of violence necessary to survive. "It's like the entire galaxy evolved past the ability to defend itself," Sora observed as she studied the decoded messages. Every advanced civilization developed the same pattern. They became peaceful, scientific, and completely vulnerable to anything that didn't share their values. Admiral Kim realized that humanity's role in the galaxy was going to be very different from what anyone had expected. While other species had evolved beyond violence, humans had perfected it. That made them uniquely suited to deal with threats that peaceful civilizations could not handle. The first test of this new role came when the human fleet received another distress signal, this one from a system 30 light-years away. The message was similar to the Volani transmission, an advanced civilization under attack by something they could not fight effectively. Captain Min-Ho Yoon volunteered to lead a task force to investigate the new threat. He had proven himself capable of adapting to unexpected situations and had gained valuable experience fighting non-human enemies. More importantly, he understood the psychological aspects of being humanity's representative to alien civilizations. As Yoon prepared his ships for departure, Admiral Kim called him to a private meeting in his ready room. The two men sat across from each other, both understanding that they were about to make decisions that would affect the future of human civilization. The Volani have been in contact with other species in this sector of the galaxy, Admiral Kim explained. Word of what we did hear is spreading. There are 17 more civilizations that want to meet with us, and at least 5 more distress signals from species under attack by various threats. Yoon nodded grimly. We're going to become the galaxy's emergency response force, aren't we? It looks that way, Kim agreed. The question is whether we're ready for that responsibility. The answer came from an unexpected source. Engineer Seokjin Kim had been analyzing the harvester biotechnology and had made a discovery that would revolutionize human military capabilities. The biomechanical systems could be reverse-engineered and adapted for human use, creating ships and weapons far more advanced than anything in the current fleet. We can take their technology and turn it into something that serves life instead of consuming it, Seokjin explained during a briefing for the senior officers. Imagine ships that can repair themselves, weapons that adapt to any threat, armor that evolves to counter enemy attacks. But the real breakthrough came when Lieutenant Colonel Taeyang Shin proposed a new type of military unit specifically designed for interstellar intervention missions. These would be Marines trained not just in combat but in first contact protocols, alien psychology, and rapid adaptation to unknown environments. We call them Liberator Corps, Shin explained. Their mission is to respond to threats that peaceful civilizations can't handle. They'll be equipped with the best of both human and alien technology, trained to fight enemies we've never seen before. The first Liberator Corps unit was formed from volunteers drawn from the Marines who had participated in the assault on the Harvester world ship. Captain Yoon was given command of the new unit, along with the experimental battleship that had been built using recovered Harvester biotechnology. The ship, designated UES Liberator, was unlike anything in human military history. Its hull could regenerate damage, its weapons could adapt to any target, and its systems learned from every battle. But unlike the Harvesters, it served life rather than consuming it. As the Liberator prepared to depart for its first mission, Admiral Kim received a communication from Earth. The news of humanity's first interstellar conflict had reached home, and the reaction was exactly what he had expected, a mixture of pride, concern, and determination to support their forces in space. More importantly, the government had approved a massive expansion of the Terran defense fleet. New battleships were being built using the hybrid human-alien technology, and recruitment centers were being established on every human colony to find volunteers for the Liberator Corps. Morthak attended the departure ceremony for the Liberator, his crystalline form glowing with what the humans had learned was the Volani expression of deep respect. He spoke to the assembled crews in his harmonic language, which the translation computers rendered into English. For 1,000 generations, the civilized species of the galaxy have sought to move beyond violence and conflict, Morthak said. We believed that intelligence and technology would eventually make warfare obsolete. We were wrong. The alien's form grew brighter as he continued. There are forces in the universe that cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or convinced to coexist peacefully. For these threats, civilized beings must rely on those who remember how to fight. Admiral Kim felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he listened to Morthak's words. Humanity was being asked to become the protectors of galactic civilization, the species that other races would call when they faced enemies too dangerous for peaceful solutions. We are honored to serve alongside the humans, Morthak concluded. They have shown us that strength and compassion are not opposites, but rather two aspects of the same noble spirit. As the Liberator departed for its first mission, Admiral Kim updated his personal log with thoughts that would later become famous throughout human space.